Hello, Reid Blackman.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm glad to speak to you today.
Me too.
Reid, you have degrees in philosophy from Cornell University, from Northwestern University, and the University of Texas in Austin. You have your PhD, but you recently left academia to create Virtue, an ethics consultancy. So you're combining ethics and technology, among other things you're doing in your work. I wanted to talk to you today about ethics and machines. And my question is, if a machine is intelligent, can we say that it has consciousness? Can it have emotions? In other words, can artificial intelligence become emotional? And if so, what would be the implications?
Okay, so there's a lot there. Look, it's going to depend in part on how you think about intelligence, right? But let's just take something like means end reasoning, thinking about how to get what you want as an instance of intelligence. That's a pretty, and dogs can exercise this kind of intelligence. Cats, pigs, crows. They can exercise that kind of intelligence. They're also clearly conscious. They also clearly have emotions. The question is whether there are other kinds of intelligent, so-called intelligent things that lack consciousness. So here's an example of that kind of thing. You might think that ants generally, an individual ant doesn't engage in means end deliberation. It's not like Bob the ant is saying, okay, how can I make sure that the colony stays alive? Oh, maybe if I dig here. That doesn't happen. Rather, what you have is ant behavior being selected for over the course of evolution so that the system as a whole exhibits what you might call a kind of intelligence, right? Because the system as a whole, the ant colony, engages in, I don't want to say means end reasoning, but engages in an activity that you might characterize as intelligent in some way. That said, it would be odd, it's not unheard of by some philosophers, but it would be odd to think that the colony itself manifests a kind of consciousness that any individual ant lacks. Another way of putting this is you might say something like, it might be the case that individual ants have certain kinds of experiences. Let's grant that for the sake of argument. It would be very odd to say that there's a consciousness or a kind of experience over and above the experience of any individual ant. So
how do you relate that back to the machines?
Well, so the original question was, does intelligence and consciousness go hand in hand? And my point was that ant colonies exhibit a certain kind of intelligence, but I wouldn't say that they exhibit a certain kind of consciousness. I certainly wouldn't say that they exhibit a certain kind of that the colony as a whole has an experiential quality, is the subject of an experience in the way that an individual ant is the subject of an experience.
Great. I like that view. You have a very special view from a philosophy perspective on things. That's great.
And then another thing to think about when you're thinking about emotions in particular is, usually if you think about emotions, there are the so-called 6 basic emotions. I won't name them all, but anger, surprise, fear, happiness are a few. But you might think that more base level than that is just pleasure and pain, where pleasure and pain are, if you like, sensations, but they're not full-blown emotions. So one question is whether an entity, whether it's built out of biological material or metal, like a robot. One question is whether it can manifest a certain kind of intelligence. Another question is whether it also, because it's a distinct thing, has a certain kind of experiential quality to it, whether it undergoes experiences, whether, in a famous phrase, there's something it's like for that thing to smell a rose or to see a sunset. A third issue is about pleasure versus pain, whether it's sentient. And then it's a whole nother level of complexity to experience emotion. So the short answer is no, intellect doesn't entail any one of those following 3 things. And you might think each step up that ladder doesn't entail another step up that ladder.
So are you equaling consciousness and emotion? Is that what I should understand? Is consciousness or emotion, or is it more than that?
No, I mean, here's one view. To be conscious is to be the subject of experience. And what I mean by that is, to be conscious is for it to be the case that there's something it's like to be that thing, right? There's nothing it's like to be a rock. Rocks aren't like, oh, I'm feeling warm today. There's something it's like I'm feeling heavy today, right? Rocks don't have experiences. They don't have consciousness.
I feel like a rock sometimes.
You feel like a rock, but that's a simile.
Yeah.
And you mean it metaphorically, like you feel heavy or something like that. So there's nothing it's like to be a rock, but there's something it's like to be a pig or a dog, and certainly, a human. There's something it's like to be a human. We undergo experiences, and you might think that what it is to be conscious is essentially to be the kind of thing that undergoes experiences.
Right. And just as a closing word, if we look at machines 50 years from now, what we call today artificial intelligence, I think the word machine needs rewriting as well.
Sure.
When do you think artificial intelligence might get to a state of consciousness?
I mean, the short answer is I have no idea, and I suspect that neither does anybody else.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is going on in the AI community is that people are working very hard on figuring out how to get machines to mimic human behavior and action, how to mimic human emotion. But of course, mimicking a thing is not the same thing as being that thing or having that thing. Parrots can say certain words, but they don't understand the language. They just know how to make certain sounds, right? So a lot of AI development is not about actually developing consciousness. It's about making it seem that the thing has consciousness.
That's a great closing to this. Thank you for today, and we'll talk again next time.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Reid.
Bye-bye.